P. Diddy behind bars and indicted on federal sex trafficking and racketeering allegations. But those aren't the only accusations Diddy's facing. In fact, there are dozens of allegations dating as far back as the 90s. We're breaking down all 47 shocking allegations against P. Diddy and what all this could mean for the future of his case. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and this is Law and Crime News. Sean Diddy Combs has now been behind bars for 1 week after he was indicted by a federal grand jury on some pretty serious charges. And with this major development in the case comes a renewed interest in the many allegations against the now disgraced rapper. So let's start with the federal indictment that lists nearly 20 allegations against Diddy in support of the charges he faces: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. From the jump on page 1, prosecutors come out swinging, alleging Diddy is guilty of sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. The indictment goes on to allege Diddy showed a pattern of abuse, mostly against women, that included verbal, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, including the use of extensive grooming tactics. So let's break these down a bit. Of the physical abuse, Diddy is accused of throwing, punching, kicking, and dragging some of his victims. We saw proof of that this spring when CNN released the infamous hotel video showing Diddy brutally assault his then-girlfriend Cassie in a hotel hallway. That incident isn't blatantly referenced in the federal indictment, and neither are any names. So we'll get to the specifics on that when we take a look at the civil suits against Diddy. But the indictment does allege that Diddy hid his victims for days at a time to recover from the injuries he inflicted without being publicly observed. Federal prosecutors allege Diddy intimidated these victims into his orbit and then forced them to participate in something he called freak-offs. These freak-offs were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. So during these sessions, Diddy would force victims to use drugs, have sex with prostitutes, and be recorded doing all this, sometimes without their knowledge. Diddy also allegedly forced victims to carry illegal firearms, often through coercion and the assistance of his associates working for the Combs enterprise. Not only would these associates help suppress the victims, but they also arranged the freak-offs by booking hotel rooms and stocking the rooms with required freak-off necessities like baby oil or personal lubricant. These associates would also procure sex workers and IVs that were given to both Combs and the victims after these freak-off sessions to help them recover from the physical exertion and drug use. As part of all this, Diddy and his associates transported and caused to be transported commercial sex workers across state lines and internationally. Okay, I know you're multitasking when you're watching our videos, and if you're out running errands, listen up. I have to tell you about the free app Upside that gets you cash back on daily essentials. I now use it every time I pump gas. It's so easy and free, so why not? All you have to do is get the Upside app and then claim an offer for whatever you're buying. You pay as usual and then follow the steps on the app to get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on the screen and use our promo code LCNews to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Diddy is also accused of transporting survivor Jane Doe across state lines when he flew her from Michigan to New York in 2003. Jane Doe filed civil suit against Diddy in fall 2023, alleging that 20 years prior, he raped her when she was only 17. According to Jane Doe's suit, she met one of Diddy's associates in Michigan and was flown on Diddy's private jet to his studio in New York. Jane Doe also provided pictures of her with Diddy in the studio, bolstering her accusations. Once there, Diddy allegedly drugged Jane Doe and forced her to drink alcohol. After that, he allegedly raped her before sending her back to the Midwest. It's a similar story from Liza Gardner, who also filed civil suit last fall. She alleges Diddy also raped her in New York, but way back in 1990. Gardner's lawsuit alleges she and a friend met Diddy at a party, and then at an after party, he gave her alcohol. He then allegedly raped her before another man also raped her. During all this, both men allegedly also raped Gardner's friend. A couple days later, Combs came to the home where Liza Gardner and her friend were staying. He was irate and began assaulting and choking Liza Gardner to the point that she passed out. That brings us to the next allegation that has stark similarities to Liza Gardner's. Joy Dickerson Neal alleges Diddy raped her in 1991, also in New York. Echoing what prosecutors would write in a federal indictment against Diddy, Dickerson Neal alleges Diddy recorded this sexual assault. Her lawsuit also argues that she's the victim of revenge porn, as Diddy showed this recording to multiple people without her consent. All three of these civil lawsuits were filed last November under the New York Survivors Act. And so too was a bombshell civil suit filed by Cassandra Ventura, Diddy's ex-girlfriend, who's also known as the singer Cassie. It was with Cassie's lawsuit that we first heard in-depth accusations about Diddy's alleged illegal activity. To start, there's the gun allegation that on at least 2 occasions, Diddy demanded Cassie hold his gun in her purse. The lawsuit goes on to state, quote, "There was no clear reason why Mr. Combs required her to hold his guns, except to reinforce to his young girlfriend that he was violent, powerful, and dangerous." Beyond the gun allegations, Cassie put forth some other major accusations in her 35-page lawsuit. She says Diddy beat her, sometimes so severely that she had to hide out in hotels for days at a time, waiting for the bruises to heal. Cassie also alleged Diddy raped her and forced her to have sex with prostitutes, and even recorded this. Then there's the allegation that Diddy got jealous when Cassie began flirting with rapper Kid Cudi in 2011. Cassie says that in 2012, Diddy told her that he was going to blow up Kid Cudi's car and that he wanted to ensure that Kid Cudi was home with his friends when it happened. Around that time, Kid Cudi's car exploded in his driveway. The allegations brought forth in Cassie's lawsuit were shocking, and so too were the accusations brought months later in yet another civil suit filed by Rodney Jones, also known as the producer Lil Rod. He began working with Diddy in 2022 on the Love album, and soon, he alleges, the abuse began. Lil Rod accuses Diddy of sexual assault, writing he was, quote, "the victim of constant, unsolicited, and unauthorized groping and touching of his anus by Mr. Combs." He also alleges Diddy and his team were grooming Lil Rod to engage in gay sex. Lil Rod further alleges that Diddy forced him to have sex with prostitutes and even drugged Lil Rod to get him to comply. On top of these sexual assault allegations, Lil Rod's lawsuit also alleges that Diddy ran a gun and drug trafficking scheme. He says there are hundreds of hours of footage and audio recordings of Mr. Combs, his staff, and his guests engaging in some serious illegal activity because Diddy apparently forced Lil Rod to constantly record him. The allegations continue, saying that Diddy covered up multiple shootings. To start, there's the New York nightclub shooting in 1999. Lil Rod alleges Diddy required his then-girlfriend Jennifer Lopez to transport his illegal firearm into the NYC nightclub. The court docs also allege Diddy forced his then-artist Shine to assume responsibility for the shooting of several individuals. Lil Rod's civil suit points to another alleged cover-up too, this time for a shooting outside Diddy's Chalice Studios on September 12, 2022. According to court docs, Diddy, his son Justin, and Justin's friend referred to as G were all there when things got heated. Lil Rod heard multiple gunshots ring out, and then he found G on the bathroom floor in the fetal position. Lil Rod says he was bleeding out of his hip and leg area. After that, Mr. Combs gave strict instructions to inform the police that he had nothing to do with the shooting. He also forced Mr. Jones to lie to the police by telling them that G was shot standing outside the studio by a drive-by assailant. So that specific allegation involves Diddy's son Justin, but another allegation and entirely separate civil suit involves his other son, Christian, or King Combs. Grace Omar K alleges that Christian Combs sexually assaulted her on a yacht in December 2022, and all this was facilitated by Diddy. That suit was filed in April, and in May, former model Crystal McKinney filed suit against Diddy too, alleging he drugged and sexually assaulted her in his New York studio back in 2003. Diddy's former bad boy artists have spoken out too, including members of Danity Kane, the girl group that Diddy helped form on MTV's Making the Band 3. Singer Aubrey O'Day alleges Diddy underpaid members of the band and later offered her the publishing rights to her songs if she signed an NDA. And there was a catch to that.
And in order to get that, I have to release him for any claims or wrongdoings or actions prior to the date of the release. I have to sign an NDA that I will never disparage Puff, Bad Boy, Janice Combs, or Justin Combs' music or EMI or Sony ever in public.
Just this month, Aubrey O'Day's Danity Kane bandmate Dawn Richard filed suit against Diddy. She alleged Diddy verbally and sexually abused her, all with the intentional infliction of emotional distress. There are so many layers to this story, dozens of allegations, civil suits, and criminal charges. And all this while Diddy sits behind bars in the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. But let's begin with those federal charges. Here's former federal prosecutor Gene Rossi. So, going off and talking about those three charges, initially to me, when I looked over the indictment, I was like, only three? It's only 14 pages. That's kind of small, short. But according to you, it sounds like RICO could be a giant charge.
I was surprised when I read this indictment that it is so short. What that tells me is the prosecutors just wanted to get this indictment out there to move this case along. And given the scope of this case, 14 pages is nothing. I predict that they're going to supersede, amend the indictment, and maybe not add more charges, but add more allegations under each charge, as they say, to add more meat to the bones and have what they call a speaking indictment. A speaking indictment is one that's very, very detailed. It's almost like reading a novel. And a speaking indictment can be over 100 pages. This one is sort of a bare bones general indictment that I predict the federal prosecutors are going to amend, supersede, and add more information.
So you said they'll likely add more allegations, more information to kind of beef up their argument, but we still only have these three charges. And I'm sure the federal prosecutors are bringing the ones that they can get a conviction on, right? The ones that have the most amount of evidence against Diddy. Do you think that's why they only brought three just to secure a conviction?
I think they only need three, and here's why. The RICO charge is so expansive that if they only use that one count, RICO, that would be enough for me. So they don't need 20, 30 counts. If they have three or four core good counts, that's enough because that RICO charge by itself is an extremely serious charge.
As far as a potential conviction, obviously down the line, and as you said, Diddy is presumed innocent. But if there is a conviction, what sort of sentence could he face? Multiple years behind bars?
Under the sentencing guidelines, which are not binding on a court, he's looking at significant time. Probably my back of the envelope arithmetic calculation is at least 10 years. At least.
Criminal defense attorney Adam Conta agrees. The federal indictment is problematic for Diddy.
It lays out what they believe is a pattern of illegal activity, all in the names and the furtherance of the Combs enterprise. I think it lacks some details, but we have, because this is an ongoing investigation and because it's sort of been in the public sphere for a while, we have more details than we normally would. They've laid out a pattern of conspiracy and racketeering that they've charged him with. But part of that is obviously that one of the victims is his ex-girlfriend Kathy, who filed this major lawsuit last year in November against him. But we kind of have the details from that lawsuit as well, so we can kind of insert those as really the jump off point to how we got here now today. But he's got some real legal challenges ahead of him, absolutely.
You brought up a good point about the pattern, showing that Diddy had a pattern to break the law in this many ways. And it all goes back kind of to Cassie and the civil suit that she filed. Obviously, they had a relationship for several years. She alleges some pretty serious accusations against him. So, how important is Cassie going to be in regards to this federal case?
Well, she's going to be incredibly important in terms of her lawsuit is really what opened up the public's attention to it, and so that's really what got everyone going. That's what got the authorities looking into her more. I mean, it was only a year ago that he got the key to the city here in New York, and now here he is indicted in the Southern District, right? So what happened in a year for someone to have fallen so far and not just got the keys to the city a year ago. He was what was he? He was given like the lifetime achievement award in the VMAs. That was just last year too. I mean, this is someone who is at the top of the public sphere in terms of reverence, in terms of respect, in terms of what they mean to the city and to the community. And for it to turn around this fast, I think we have to look directly at Cassie and her lawsuit filed on November 16th. And even though they settled it a day later, again, the details of what was alleged got out there. And then what that really did, just like the Me Too movement, it started other people who are alleged victims of his thinking, well, maybe now is my time to come forward. If in fact that they felt threatened by Diddy, if in fact they were coerced not to say anything through violent threats, through physical threats, through emotional threats, and potentially of having whatever acts they committed with Diddy being recorded and even having those used against them as electronic threats. Um, After Cassie's lawsuit, they started to come out, and then you saw another lawsuit in December, and then another one, and another one, and so there were a couple that came out that really started steamrolling this sort of this change in a public opinion of him, just like happened with R. Kelly, although these are separate charges and they have not been proven like R. Kelly's. But just like in R. Kelly, it took the public a little while to kind of get around this notion of this pop superstar who we've grown to love for decades, and now kind of peel back the onions to his personal persona that could be quite disturbing. And so, even though she is not going to be she might not be doing interviews and she might not be out there sort of as the public figurehead of this indictment. She's certainly at the genesis of it and is the reason this whole thing got rolling.
And what continued the ball rolling was Lil Rod's suit. For this, I'll turn to former prosecutor Melba Pearson. Obviously, every lawsuit is very important in this case, but Lil Rod's actually mentions hundreds of hours of video footage. He's talking about these illegal activities, making these pretty severe allegations, but says, hey, there's audio, video, photos. Do you think that was a big reason why the feds executed those search warrants back in March?
Absolutely, because they had to seize all of that evidence to be able to use it at trial later on down the line. So they now had specific things they were looking for because remember, a search warrant can't just be a fishing expedition. You have to be able to detail in the warrant what you're expecting to find or what you are seeking. And so with Little Rod's lawsuit, the feds were able to be like, okay, we're looking for video, we're looking for surveillance video that may have been located in this particular room. We're looking for a particular time frame when these incidences occurred. So what evidence can we find that substantiates what occurred during that time frame while we're looking through the house? So it all came together to be able to give the feds the information they needed to be able to do these searches effectively, follow the trail of evidence, and then lead to the indictment.
All roads kind of lead back to these civil suits because obviously now we have the criminal side of things, which you've talked about, and that's going to be something we'll follow closely. But the civil side is kind of what paved the way. And I'm wondering now that Diddy is in custody, what's going to happen to these civil suits? Are they stalled? What would that look like?
What generally happens is that the civil attorneys will sort of wait and see what happens in the criminal case because so much of the evidence that comes out in the criminal case could be a treasure trove for the civil lawsuit. So, for instance, if Diddy were to get on the stand and testify, which I highly doubt he would, if he were to get on the stand and testify, his testimony can be admissible in the civil lawsuit, especially if he gives conflicting statements. He can be what we called impeached, or basically, to use the colloquialism, basically called out like, hey, you said this on this date. Now, at the criminal trial, now at the civil trial, you're saying something different, which is the truth, that sort of thing. So I think that the civil lawsuits may be on pause, not to say that they're going to be dropped or anything along those lines, but the criminal case is what's going to take precedence right now. And then once that's disposed of meaning guilty plea or a trial, guilty, not guilty, whatever the case may be, mistrial, then the civil lawsuits will pick back up again.
After his arrest, Diddy pleaded not guilty to federal charges. A statement from his legal team reads, quote, Sean Diddy Combs is a music icon, self-made entrepreneur, loving family man, and proven philanthropist who has spent the last 30 years building an empire, adoring his children, and working to uplift the Black community. He is an imperfect person, but is not criminal. To his credit, Mr. Combs has been nothing but cooperative with this investigation, and he voluntarily relocated to New York last week in anticipation of these charges. Please reserve your judgment until you have all the facts. These are the acts of an innocent man with nothing to hide, and he looks forward to clearing his name in court. That was a look at all 47 shocking allegations against disgraced rapper P. Diddy. To be sure you never miss an update in his case, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page. For Law and Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.